The card room smelled like expensive cologne and cheap desperation. I'd been dealing blackjack at Vitale's for 3 weeks, long enough to learn which regulars tilted when they lost, which ones carried debts that would follow them into graves, and which ones came here to forget something they couldn't say aloud. Tonight, I was trying to forget too. My ex-boyfriend's engagement announcement had hit my phone at 2 a.m. 6 months. That's how long it took him to move on from me. 6 months to erase 5 years. So I'd come to work at this casino, a decision so impulsive it should have been made while drunk, but I'd made it stone sober, which somehow felt worse. My friend Liv had gotten me the dealer position through her uncle's connection. "You need to get out of that apartment," she'd said. "You need to stop checking his Instagram." She was right. She usually was. What I didn't anticipate was Massimo Vitale. He arrived around midnight, and I knew immediately something was wrong. Not because of what he wore, a threadbare gray coat that hung like someone had pulled it from a donation bin. Not because of his appearance, disheveled dark hair, unshaven jaw, a kind of broken exhaustion etched into his face. I knew something was wrong because the entire casino shifted. The security guard's eyes sharpened. The pit boss straightened. Even the ambient chatter seemed to dim, as if the air itself had recognized a predator. But he looked like he'd wandered in from the street. Literally. His shoes were scuffed to hell. He came straight to my table. I was mid-shuffle when he sat in the last chair, and I felt it immediately, that electric wrongness, like standing too close to a live wire. His eyes were dark gray, almost colorless, and they watched my hands with the kind of intensity that made my breath catch. "Minimum bet is 20, I said, keeping my voice level. Professional, dealer voice. The voice I'd perfected to sound like nothing, like a machine that existed only to move cards. He didn't respond. Just placed a $100 chip on the table. The other players seemed nervous suddenly. A woman to his left shifted her purse. The man across from him cleared his throat loudly. I dealt the hand. He won. Barely looked at his cards. Just knew. 5 hands in a row. He didn't smile. Didn't celebrate. Just collected his chips like he was confirming something he already knew. The pit boss hovered, uncertain. I kept dealing, and my hands were shaking, barely perceptible. But there, on the 6th hand, everything changed. A man I'd never seen before approached the table. Expensive suit, expensive watch, the kind of guy who probably owned 3 homes. He was angry. I could see it in the way his jaw clenched when he saw the disheveled stranger cleaning up the table. "That's my lucky spot," the man said. Not to me, to the stranger in the beggared coat. The stranger didn't move, didn't even acknowledge him. I said. The stranger turned his head. Slowly, like he was considering whether the man in front of him was worth the oxygen it would take to respond. What happened next was simultaneous and fractured. The security guards moved toward them. The pit boss started to intervene. I watched the stranger's hand still resting on the table, perfectly still, and somehow, the entire room understood that any movement from that hand would be catastrophic. The angry man's face went pale. "Walk away," the stranger said. His voice was low, almost gentle. The kind of gentle that made it clear he wasn't asking. The man left. Immediately. Without his chips, without his dignity. Everyone else at the table found reasons to cash out within minutes. I was alone with him. My heart was doing something irregular. Not fear exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something that felt dangerous. I kept my eyes on the cards, shuffling with mechanical precision. The casino floor hummed around us. Security stayed at the periphery, watching but not intervening. "You're new," he said. It wasn't a question. 3 weeks, I replied. Standard answer, dealer voice. "You deal from the middle of the deck during tense hands." I froze. Mid-shuffle. No one had ever noticed that before, that tiny tell I had when I was anxious, where my fingers would guide the cut slightly off-center. It was unconscious, invisible. "You're also afraid of me," he continued, "but not for the reasons you should be." I looked up. His eyes held mine, and I felt something crack open inside my chest. Something I'd locked down tight after my ex. Something that wanted to betray every bit of sense I had left. "I'm not afraid," I lied. "Your left hand is trembling," he said. "You think you're hiding it by keeping it low. You're not." I pulled my hands back, pressed them flat against the table. He watched me do it with an expression I couldn't read, something between amusement and hunger. "What's your name?" he asked. I should have refused to answer, should have called the pit boss, should have done 1,000 things that would have been smart and safe. Instead, I told him the truth. "Asha." He nodded slowly, like he was confirming a fact he'd already researched. I'm Massimo. The name meant nothing to me. Or that's what I told myself. The way the security guard stiffened suggested it meant everything. Are you going to keep playing? Or are you going to ask me the questions you're obviously dying to ask? His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Don't worry, I prefer honesty. Most people bore me. Are you here to rob the place? The question came out before I could stop it. He actually laughed a sound like dark chocolate, unexpected and complex. Would I rob my own casino? The words hit me like a physical blow. His casino. The man in the beggared coat. The man sitting in my dealer station, with the kind of power that made security guards hold their breath. He owned this place. He owned me, technically, though not in any way that made sense. You didn't know, he said, and it wasn't a question. Your pit boss didn't warn you. Why would you come here dressed like... I gestured vaguely at his destroyed coat, his ruined shoes, to see who works here when they think I'm not watching. His gaze sharpened. To see who deals honestly, who steals, who's desperate enough to make mistakes. His eyes found mine again, and to see if anyone new is interesting enough to keep around. The way he said it wasn't a compliment. It was a threat wrapped in silk. Are you going to fire me? I asked. No. He stood up, and the movement was predatory grace. He was taller than I'd realized, broader. The threadbare coat couldn't hide the fact that he was all controlled power underneath. I'm going to do something worse. Worse? My voice came out barely audible. I'm going to make you deal me private games. He leaned down, and his proximity made my skin electric. Every night, alone. And Asha, try to hide that tell again, and I'll find out why you're really here, because you are running from something. I can smell it. He walked away before I could respond, leaving his chips on the table and a wake of disrupted air. I sat there, hands shaking, finally understanding that my terrible week had just become infinitely more complicated. I'd just been marked. The private game room was on the top floor, accessible only by elevator, the kind with a key card, and probably cameras I couldn't see. I'd been coming here for 4 nights now, and I still hadn't figured out what was happening. Massimo never cheated, never even needed to. He played like he could see through the cards, like probability bent itself around his will. We never talked about the casino, about the business, about anything that mattered. Instead, he asked me questions. What are you running from? He'd asked on night 1. What makes you think I'm running? I'd answered, dealing. You have the look of someone who chose the first escape route available. Logic be damned. On night 2. Do you have a family? Does it matter? It does if they're looking for you. On night 3. Why do you think you're here? Because you made me come here. No. He'd leaned forward, and the candlelight caught the sharp planes of his face. Why do you think you wanted to come here? I hadn't answered that one. Couldn't. The truth was too complicated that somewhere between night 1 and night 3, the fear had begun transforming into something else. Something that made my pulse race in a way that had nothing to do with danger, and everything to do with the way he watched me shuffle. The way his fingers would brush the table when he was thinking. The way his voice dropped when he was being honest. Tonight, night 4, he arrived earlier than usual. I was setting up the table when he came in, and he wasn't wearing the beggar's coat anymore. He was in a black shirt, sleeves rolled up, and I could see the edge of a tattoo on his forearm, something that looked like a name, though I couldn't quite make it out. His hair was damp, like he'd just showered. He looked almost human. Almost. Deal, he said, but he didn't sit down immediately. Instead, he went to the bar in the corner and poured 2 glasses of something amber-colored. He set one in front of me. I don't drink while I'm dealing. Then stop dealing and start talking. I picked up the glass. It burned going down expensive scotch, the kind that probably cost more than my apartment. About what? About why you flinched when I touched the table last night. I hadn't realized he'd noticed. I didn't. You did. Your whole body went tight, like you were bracing for impact. He sat down, but he didn't set chips on the table, just sat there, studying me like I was a puzzle he was determined to solve. Someone hurt you. Someone with hands that were supposed to be safe. My chest constricted. You don't know anything about me. I know you deal from the middle when you're anxious. I know you tip the cocktail waitresses even though you can barely afford it. I know you've checked your phone 17 times tonight to see if someone messaged you. And every time the screen was dark. You tried to hide how much that hurt. He leaned forward slightly. I know you're terrified of me, but you come back anyway. Maybe I need the money. You made more in your first week than you'd make in a month at any other casino. You're not here for the money, Asha. You're here because something about me makes you feel less alone. The words hit something raw. I drank more scotch, not looking at him. That's insane. Is it? His voice softened. Tell me I'm wrong. I couldn't. He wasn't wrong. That was the terrifying part. In 4 nights, he'd seen more of me than my ex had seen in 5 years. He'd noticed my tells, my fears, the way I braced myself when someone got too close. And instead of exploiting that, he was, what? Offering something? I couldn't figure out what. Who is she? I asked suddenly. He went very still. Who? The person whose name is tattooed on your arm. I'd asked the question without thinking. But as soon as the words left my mouth, I realized I'd crossed something, a line I wasn't supposed to cross. The air in the room changed. His face closed off. That, he said quietly, is not something we discuss. So there is someone. There was. His eyes were ice. And she's dead. The words landed hard. He stood up abruptly, walked to the window that overlooked the city. The lights below looked fragile from up here, like they could shatter, like everything could shatter. How? I asked, voice small. Because I loved her, and that made her a liability. He didn't turn around. Because I thought I could protect her, and I was wrong. Because this world, he gestured vaguely at everything, doesn't allow for vulnerability. It consumes it, breaks it down into useless components. I wanted to move toward him. Every instinct screamed at me to do it, but I was frozen, understanding suddenly that the tenderness he'd been showing me over 4 nights wasn't kindness. It was something more dangerous. It was him lowering his guard, letting me see the wound underneath, and that meant he was making a choice that could destroy us both. Why are you telling me this? I whispered. Because you asked. He finally turned to face me. And because I think I'm about to make the same mistake again, and I want you to know what's coming. My mouth went dry. Massimo, there's going to be a game on Saturday. A bigger one. People from other families will be here. People who will see you, and they'll see what you are to me, and they'll start calculating your value. He moved toward me slowly, deliberately. Once that happens, you won't be able to just leave. You'll be in this with me, deep. I could leave now, I said. But we both knew it wasn't true. No, you couldn't. He stopped in front of my chair, and I had to tilt my head back to look at him. I've already decided I want to keep you. The only question is whether you're brave enough to stay. His hand came up, and instead of the touch I was expecting, he just traced a finger down the side of my face, soft, almost reverent, like I was something fragile, like I was worth breaking the rules for. I'm not, I said, but I didn't move away. Yes, you are. He leaned down, and his mouth was close enough that I could feel the heat of him. Because you haven't left yet. And you won't. He kissed me then, slow and deep and completely overwhelming. His hand tangled in my hair, and I felt the exact moment my ability to think clearly dissolved. His other hand found my waist, pulled me up and against him, and I let him. I let myself fall into it, into him, understanding with absolute clarity that nothing in my life would ever be simple again. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with something that looked like regret. Saturday, he said. After that, everything changes. The Friday night before the big game, Massimo came to my apartment. I didn't even know he had my address until he was standing in my doorway, rain-soaked and furious. It was 2 a.m., and I'd been asleep. But the moment I saw him, something electric jolted through my nervous system. Why didn't you tell me? He demanded, not bothering with greetings. I pulled my robe tighter. Tell you what? That your ex is getting married in 2 weeks. Here, in this city. That you've been checking his engagement page every night at midnight. The invasion of privacy should have alarmed me. Instead, I was struck by the fact that he'd been paying this much attention. That he cared enough to be angry about it. How do you know that? Because I know everything about you, Asha. And if I don't, I find out. He came inside without being invited, water dripping from his coat onto my hardwood floor. And I need to know if you're going to be distracted during the game tomorrow. I need to know if you're still holding on to someone who didn't deserve you. What I feel about my ex is not your concern. Everything about you is my concern now. His voice was lethal quiet. That was the deal. You're mine. That means I protect you, and I know what's happening in your head at all times. I'm not yours, I said, even though my heart was racing. I'm not property. No. He moved closer, and I stepped back until I hit the wall. He caged me there, palms flat against the wall on either side of my head. But you made a choice. You came to my game room, 4 nights in a row. You let me kiss you. You wanted me to. His eyes held mine, and there was something vulnerable in them, something that broke through the menace. I need you to tell me you don't regret it. I don't, I whispered. And I need to know that when you're in that room tomorrow and men with worse intentions than me are watching you, that you're going to remember who you belong to. Massimo, say it. I belong to you, I said. And the moment the words left my mouth, I felt something shift. Like a contract had been signed in blood. He kissed me then. And it was different from the first kiss, rougher. More desperate. Like he was trying to prove something to himself. His hands came up to frame my face, his fingers in my hair, and I could feel the slight tremor in them. This man, this terrifying, powerful man, was shaking. For me, I'm terrified, he admitted against my mouth. I've spent the last 5 years convincing myself that I couldn't care about anyone ever again. That caring was weakness. And then you walked into my casino, and you couldn't hide a single emotion, and I watched you try to protect yourself, and I wanted to. He stopped, pulling back enough to look at me. I want to destroy anyone who's ever hurt you. I want to rewrite your entire history, so that the only version that exists is the one where you're safe. That's not how it works, I said softly. I know. He rested his forehead against mine. But tomorrow, during the game, I'm going to make sure everyone knows that you're untouchable, because if anyone so much as looks at you wrong, I'll burn this entire city down. And he meant it. That was the terrifying, beautiful part. He absolutely meant it. We ended up on my bed somehow, though I don't remember moving. The rain drummed against the windows, and Massimo kissed me like he was memorizing the map of my body, like this might be the last time. His hands were gentle, so much gentler than I expected from someone so dangerous. He moved slowly, deliberately, and when he finally entered me, it felt like a vow. Afterward, we lay tangled together, and I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. Not in letting him in and thinking I could ever go back to my old life now. He'd marked me in ways that had nothing to do with visible bruises. He'd mapped his name across my skin in touches and whispered promises, and I'd never be able to wash him off. The person whose name is on your arm, I said into the darkness. What was her name? This time, he answered. Juliana. She was the sister of one of my business associates. We were together for 2 years. His arm tightened around me. She knew what I was, and she said it didn't matter. She said she loved me anyway, and I believed her because I wanted to believe her. He paused. 3 years ago, a rival family found out about her. They grabbed her, made me choose between losing her or losing control of half my operation. What did you choose? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Neither. I went after her. I walked into their territory alone, and I got her back. His voice had gone flat, emotionless, the voice of someone telling a story about someone else. But I was too late. They'd already hurt her. Too much hurt. She died in my arms, telling me she was sorry that she couldn't be strong enough for me. I wanted to say I was sorry, but the words felt hollow. That's when I decided that love was a liability I couldn't afford, he continued. That the only safe person for me to be was a version of myself that couldn't feel anything. And I succeeded, Asha. For 3 years I succeeded. I built an empire. I made myself untouchable. He shifted, pulling back enough to look at me. And then you dealt me a hand of cards. And all of that fell apart. I'm not Juliana, I said carefully. No, you're stronger. You're meaner. You protect yourself first, and that's better. He kissed my forehead. But you're still dangerous to me. Still a liability. Still something that a man like me shouldn't want. But you do want me. I do, he said. God help us both. I do. We stayed wrapped together through the rest of the night, and I listened to the rain and tried not to think about how fragile everything felt. How one wrong move, one miscalculation, one person with a gun and a grudge could shatter this before it even really began. His phone buzzed at dawn. He looked at the message, and I watched the tenderness drain from his face, replaced by something cold and calculated. What is it? I asked. The game. He was already pulling on his clothes. Something's happened. We need to move up the timeline. What do you mean? Move up? I mean, he said, meeting my eyes, that everything's about to get very complicated very fast. Are you ready? I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell him that I'd changed my mind, that I wanted to go back to my simple, boring life. Instead, I got out of bed and started getting dressed. Yes, I said. I'm ready. He smiled then, a smile that held no warmth, only hunger. We'll see if you still mean that by morning. The game room was different on Saturday night. The table was larger, surrounded by 6 monitors displaying stock tickers and surveillance feeds. The bar had been stocked with bottles I'd never seen before. Old scotch, rare cognac, wine that probably cost more than entire months of my life, and the security was oppressive. Armed men in tailored suits stood at every entrance, earpieces glinting in the overhead light. Massimo had dressed me for this. He'd appeared at my apartment with a bag containing a dress so expensive I was afraid to touch it, black silk that clung to my waist and fell to my ankles, a slit up the thigh that revealed everything and nothing. He'd fastened a diamond bracelet around my wrist himself, his fingers lingering on my pulse point. "This is a message," he'd said into my neck. "That you're under my protection. That you're marked." 5 men had arrived by 10 p.m. 3, I didn't recognize, dangerous men with dead eyes and the kind of scarred hands that came from surviving things normal people couldn't comprehend. 2 I recognized from my research after Massimo left. Dante Scarpello, Victor Kushner. Both known to be heads of competing families, both rumored to have bodies stacked higher than buildings. Massimo moved between them like a shark, charming and lethal, every gesture a calculation. He'd warned me not to look at him, not to give anything away. "Just deal," he'd said. "Be beautiful, be mysterious, let them wonder." I was on my 4th hand when something changed. One of the unknown men, tall, scarred, with a Russian accent, leaned back in his chair and stared at me. Not at my cards, at me. "She's new," he said to Massimo. "She is. Beautiful. Where did you find her?" "At my casino." "How much?" The question hung in the air like poison. Massimo's expression didn't change, but I felt him tense. The entire room felt his tension, even though he hadn't moved. "She's not for sale," he said mildly. "Everything's for sale," the Russian replied. "I'll pay double whatever you're paying her. Triple. I need a dealer who can think on her feet." He smiled at me, and it revealed teeth that had been knocked out and replaced. "What's your name, beautiful?" "Asha," I said, because I'd been instructed to answer direct questions. My voice came out steady, which was a miracle. "Asha, I'm Dmitri, and I think you should consider working for me. I pay much better than Vitali, and I don't mark my employees." Massimo set down his cards. Slowly, deliberately, every motion deliberate enough to be threatening. "The game's over," he said quietly. "But we haven't finished the—" I said, "The game's over." He stood up, and the security guards at the walls moved closer, hands resting on weapons. "You don't come into my casino, in my game room, and insult me by suggesting I'd let my woman be touched by another man." The temperature in the room plummeted. Dmitri laughed, a sound like glass breaking. "Your woman? How many times has she been used before you?" "A casino dealer, Vitali." "You've fallen for a casino dealer. How disappointing." What happened next occurred in fractured slow motion. Massimo moved faster than anything that large should move, and his hand closed around Dimitri's throat. He lifted him out of the chair like he weighed nothing, and pressed him against the wall. The impact knocked a painting crooked. "That was your only warning," Massimo said softly. "The next time you disrespect her, I won't just break you. I'll make sure you die slowly enough that you have time to regret every word that came out of your mouth." He released Dmitri, who gasped for air, his face mottled purple. The other men at the table hadn't moved, hadn't reacted, just watched like they were watching a routine disciplinary action. "Get him out," Massimo said to his guards. Dmitri was dragged out, still choking. The other men looked at their cards carefully. "Next hand," Massimo said, sitting down. He didn't look at me, but his hand found mine under the table and squeezed once. "I've got you. Stay still." The game continued for 3 more hours. I dealt with shaking hands, trying to remember every dealer principle while my mind was fracturing. That man Dmitri had been trying to buy me, and Massimo had nearly killed him for it. By the time the last hand was played, I couldn't breathe right. The men left one by one, each offering Massimo a nod of acknowledgement, the kind of nod that said, "Respect." Dante was last, and he paused at the door. "She's trouble," he said, not unkindly. "I know," Massimo replied. "You're not thinking straight because of her." "Probably not. That's going to get you killed. You understand that?" Massimo looked at me, really looked at me, and something in his face shifted. "Yes, I do understand that." When we were finally alone, I couldn't speak. I just stared at the cards scattered across the table. "Don't," Massimo said softly. He was behind me, and his hands came down on my shoulders. Don't spiral into guilt or fear or whatever you're about to feel. I made a choice. I've known for months that having you would make me vulnerable. I made the choice anyway. They're going to use me against you, I said. That's why Dimitri. Yes. Dimitri was testing the waters, figuring out how far they could push. He turned me to face him. His hands were shaking again, and he found his answer. There is no distance. I will burn the world before I let anyone take you. That's insane. Yes. He pulled me close, buried his face in my hair. I'm aware. But this is who I am now, Asha. You changed me. The moment you said my name, you changed the fundamental architecture of everything I was. He held me like that while the rain started again outside, and I could feel the precariousness of our situation settling into my bones. This thing between us, it wasn't a love story. It was a threat to everyone around us. It was weakness, dressed up as passion, vulnerability disguised as power, and the worst part was that I didn't want to let go. For 2 weeks, I didn't go home. Massimo moved me into his penthouse, the one on the 52nd floor that overlooked the city like he owned it. Which, technically, he did. He owned most of this city. The building itself was just one piece of his collection. The penthouse was designed by someone with a taste for control, everything in its place, everything purposeful. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a library with books bound in leather that probably cost more than cars, a kitchen that looked like it had never been used, and a bedroom that smelled like him. You're a prisoner, I said on day 3, standing in front of the windows. You're protected, he corrected. He was behind me as usual, like he couldn't bear not to touch me. His hand traced the curve of my spine. There's a difference. My work. You don't work there anymore. My apartment. Already cleared out and stored. He pressed a kiss to the back of my neck. I have people handling it. My life is here now, he finished. With me, I should have been furious. Instead, I was oddly relieved. The Asha who dealt cards had been living on borrowed time anyway. The woman Massimo had created in her place, someone who existed only in his penthouse, only in his bed, felt more real somehow. It was on day 5 that the threats started appearing. Notes left on the penthouse steps despite the security. Dead roses left in the elevator. A photograph slipped under the door showing me asleep. My location exact enough that they could have killed me if they'd wanted to. Massimo didn't panic, but I noticed the way his jaw tightened when he found them. The way his hands would clench into fists. The way he'd stand at the windows late at night, phone to his ear, discussing eliminations and security sweeps in a voice that made it clear people were going to die because of me. Stop, I told him on day 8. He was on the phone again, discussing someone named Carmine. Stop doing this because of me. He ended the call without preamble and turned to face me. His eyes were exhausted, rimmed with darkness that suggested he wasn't sleeping. I can't, he said simply. You can. You can tell them to stop. Asha. He crossed the space between us, and his hands came up to frame my face. Do you understand what you are to me? I'm a liability. You're a liability that I'm choosing to protect. His thumbs traced my cheekbones. And every second you're in this city, people are asking themselves if they can use you to get to me. Every photo that circulates of us together is another bullseye on your back. Do you understand that? Then let me leave. His hand stilled. What? Let me leave the city. Go somewhere they can't find me. Then they don't have anything to use against you. No. Massimo. No. He pulled me against him, his arms coming around me like he was afraid I'd dissolve. I spent 5 years proving that I didn't need anyone, that I was stronger alone. And I was. But I don't want to be that anymore, and I'm not letting you go. People are dying because of this. People die anyway, he said harshly. They die in business disputes and territorial wars and blood feuds that were started 50 years ago. If they're dying now, it's because they chose to be stupid enough to threaten my woman. That's on them. I pulled back far enough to look at him. Don't make this my fault. I'm not. His expression softened. I'm making it my choice. And you're going to have to accept that I'm not the kind of man who lets go. That night, we made love with a desperation that felt like saying goodbye. He moved over me like every touch might be the last. His hands mapping territory he'd already memorized. His mouth against my skin, whispering things in Italian that I couldn't translate but understood anyway, apologies and promises and declarations that sounded like curses. I need you to understand something, he said afterward, lying in the dark with me wrapped around him. If I ever lost you, if anything happened to you, don't, I interrupted. Don't think like that. I have to think like that. I have to be prepared for any eventuality. And the eventuality I keep seeing is you dead because you got attached to me." He shifted, turning to face me. "So I need to know you're not going to run. I need you to promise that you'll stay, even when this becomes harder than it is now." "How much harder can it get?" "You don't want to know." I did, though. On day 11, I found out. The phone call came at 3 a.m. Massimo was asleep beside me, and the phone was on his nightstand. He grabbed it before the third ring, and his entire body went rigid. "Where?" he said into the darkness. Then, "I'm coming." He was out of bed and moving before I could fully wake. I followed him to the closet where he dressed in dark clothes, practical, functional, built for violence. He strapped a gun to his thigh with movements so practiced they looked like ritual. "What happened?" I asked. "Dimitri found one of my safe houses, made a move on the merchandise." His voice had gone cold in a way that made me realize I'd never heard him sound truly angry before. "I have to go. You stay here. Don't answer the door for anyone. Don't leave the penthouse. I'll send guards up to lock you in." "Lock me in? I need to know you're secure." He leaned down and kissed my forehead roughly. "I'll be back in a few hours. Sleep." He left, and 2 guards took positions outside the bedroom door. I heard the electronic locks engage. I was trapped, actually locked in, separated from any escape route. I sat in that bed for hours, listening to the city outside the windows, and understood that this was the cost of loving someone like Massimo. It wasn't just danger, it was captivity. It was the systematic dismantling of your autonomy, justified by the word protection. When he came back at dawn, he was covered in blood. Not his, someone else's. He showered while I pretended to sleep, and when he came back to bed, he was clean but still carrying something dark in his eyes, the kind of dark that came from crossing lines you couldn't uncross. "Did you kill him?" I asked when he lay down beside me. "No. I hurt him. Made him understand that threatening what's mine has consequences." He pulled me close. "He'll live, but he'll never forget that I'm capable of anything when it comes to you. Massimo, I know what I am, Asha. I've never pretended to be anything different. But I need you to accept that this is the reality of being with me. This is what love looks like in my world." I wanted to tell him that this wasn't love, that this was obsession and possession, and something fundamentally broken. But I didn't, because I was terrified that if I pushed, he'd let me go. And somewhere in the past weeks, letting him go had become impossible. The first time I saw him cry, I almost didn't recognize it. We were in the study, Massimo's private sanctuary, surrounded by leather-bound books and the kind of wood that smelled like old money. He'd been on the phone all morning, conducting business in a language I didn't speak but understood well enough. The language of power and control, of making people disappear. He'd hung up around noon and just sat there, head in his hands, shoulders shaking slightly. I'd been pretending to read on the couch, giving him space. He always needed space after these calls, time to transition back into the version of himself that was capable of tenderness. But something about the way he was sitting made me move toward him instead of away. "Massimo?" He didn't look up. His hands were shaking. Actually shaking, like someone with palsy. "What happened?" I knelt in front of his chair and gently pulled his hands away from his face. His eyes were red, wet. I'd never seen Massimo Vitale cry, and it broke something inside me that I was still trying to convince myself was intact. "They killed him," he said, voice rough. "The boy I sent undercover to Dimitri's operation. He was 23 years old, and they found him 3 hours ago in a ditch, with 3 bullets in his head. I'm sorry. Don't." He pulled away from me, standing abruptly. "Don't apologize for their actions. I did this. I sent him there knowing it was dangerous. And I justified it because I needed information about how far Dimitri was willing to go to hurt me." He moved to the window, staring out at the city below. "And now his mother is going to get a phone call from someone telling her that her son isn't coming home." I moved toward him carefully, like approaching a wounded animal. "This isn't your fault." "Yes, it is." He turned to face me, and the anguish in his expression was raw, unfiltered. "Every death that's happened since you came into my life is directly traceable to my decision to keep you. I knew the risks. I did it anyway. Then let me go." "No." The word was final. "I'm not letting you go. But I need you to understand the cost of staying. I need you to look at me and see someone capable of sending a 23-year-old boy to his death because I wanted to protect you. I see someone who's trying to protect people the only way he knows how. That's not good enough." He moved away from me, pacing the room like something caged. You're making excuses for me, and I won't let you. I won't be redeemed by your love, Asha. I'm not capable of redemption. What I'm capable of is violence and control and obsession, and you're drowning in all three. Maybe I want to drown, I said quietly. He stopped, turned to look at me with an expression like I'd physically struck him. What? Maybe I want this. Maybe I want you exactly as you are, dark and dangerous and willing to burn the world. I crossed the space between us. You think you're breaking me, but you're not. You're just showing me what I was always capable of being. Asha, the woman I was before, the one who checked her ex's Instagram every day and wondered why she wasn't good enough, she was already broken. You didn't break her. You just finally showed her how to survive the breaking. He stared at me for a long moment, and then he kissed me. Not tenderly, not gently, with a kind of desperation that tasted like apology and acceptance and something close to love. We ended up on the floor of his study, surrounded by books and expensive things that we didn't care about. He moved inside me like he was trying to say something his voice couldn't articulate, something about surrender and loss and the choosing of each other despite everything. I'm terrified of loving you, he admitted afterward, still inside me, his weight heavy and real against my body. Good, I said. You should be. We stayed like that until his arms went numb and my legs cramped, and neither of us moved because the separation felt like too much. There's something I need to tell you, he said eventually. Something that changes everything. I felt my heart rate accelerate. What? My business, it's bigger than you know. I don't just run casinos and deal in money laundering. I deal in other things. He shifted, meeting my eyes. Information, weapons, occasionally trafficking of very specific high-value items. I've built an empire on being the person everyone turns to when they need something impossible. I know, I said. You don't really. He sat up, pulling me with him. I'm not just a criminal, Aisha. I'm the kind of criminal that governments are afraid of, and people know that being with me makes you a target in ways you can't even comprehend. So let me understand it. I took his hand. Tell me. For the next 3 hours, he did. He told me about the weapons deals with insurgent groups, the information he traded to intelligence agencies, the way he'd positioned himself as the middleman for every dangerous transaction in a 5-country radius. He told me about the bodies, about the compromises, about the moment he realized he'd become the kind of person who could order someone's death and eat dinner afterward without his appetite suffering. And through it all, I didn't let go of his hand. I'm telling you this so you can make an informed decision, he said finally. If you want to leave, I'll help you disappear. Full identity, new location, enough money to start a completely new life. I'll set it up, and then I'll let you go, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure no one I know can find you. Will you? I asked. Will you really let me go? His silence was answer enough. That's what I thought. I stood up, pulling him with me. Because you can't, and I can't. So we stop pretending that we have choices anymore, and we just accept what this is. What is it? He asked. It's the worst thing that could happen to both of us, I said. And also the only thing that either of us actually wants. He kissed me again, and this time there was no desperation in it. Just acceptance. The betrayal came from inside. Massimo's second-in-command, a man named Carmine, who'd been with him for 15 years, had been working with Dimitri the entire time. The realization came at 4 p.m. on a Tuesday, delivered by one of Massimo's fixers in a conference room I wasn't supposed to know existed. I was in the penthouse when Massimo came home. He didn't say anything for a long time, just poured himself a glass of scotch and stared out the window at the city that had just betrayed him. Carmine, I said quietly. He nodded slowly. He gave them everything. Operations, schedules, safe house locations, personnel lists. And in exchange, Dimitri promised him a percentage of the West Side territory. What did Dimitri promise him that was worth more than loyalty? That's the question I've been asking myself. Massimo drained the scotch. I think the answer is me. I think Dimitri promised him my organization. My death. Are you going to kill him? Yes. The word was delivered with perfect calm. I'm going to make it slow enough that he has time to regret every decision he made. I'm going to make sure he watches everything he cares about burn before I finally let him die. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. When? Tonight. He dressed for it with the same methodical precision he used for everything else. Dark clothes, weapons. The armor of someone who had resigned himself to darkness. He moved like someone operating on pure function, divorced from emotion. I'm coming with you, I said. No. Massimo. No. He looked at me with eyes that seemed to have aged a decade in the last hour. I need you to stay here. I need to know that you're safe while I handle this. I don't care about safe anymore. I care about you. That's the problem. He came toward me and pulled me into his arms. That's the exact problem. You've become something I have to protect, which means every choice I make now has to account for you. And tonight, I need to be someone who can't afford to protect anyone. He kissed the top of my head, held me like I was something fragile, and then he left. The guards locked the door behind him. I was trapped in that penthouse, watching the clock move through hours that felt like years. At 11 p.m., my phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. It was a video file. I almost didn't watch it. Something in my chest was screaming at me not to press play. But I was transfixed by the blood in the thumbnail, by the sound of someone screaming that I could hear even before I unmuted the audio. It was Carmine. Massimo had him in what looked like the basement of the casino, exposed brick, chains hanging from the ceiling, industrial lighting that turned everything into a slaughterhouse. He was beating Carmine methodically, with the kind of detached precision that suggested this could continue indefinitely. You want to tell me why? Massimo asked, his voice eerily calm. Or should I just keep breaking things until you lose consciousness? Carmine spat blood. Dimitri offered me more. More what? Money? Territory? You know I would have given you either of those things. All you had to do was ask. I wanted what was yours. Massimo paused. Then he laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You wanted my organization. You wanted to build an empire by stealing mine. You wanted to be the kind of man I am. I wanted to be better than you. The fist that connected with Carmine's face made a sound like watermelons hitting pavement. Blood scattered across the floor, and I had to look away from the phone screen. When I looked back, Massimo was crouching in front of Carmine, his voice low and intimate. You were never going to be better than me, he said. You were never even going to be close. And you know why? Because I would literally kill everyone in this city before I let someone take what I've built, and you gambled that I wouldn't. You gambled that 15 years of loyalty was enough to protect you from the monster you helped create. Please, Carmine whispered. Too late. The video ended. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of the bed Massimo and I shared, phone in hand, and tried to reconcile the man I loved with the man in that basement. I tried to find the difference between protection and possession, between love and obsession. I couldn't. Massimo didn't come back until dawn. He was clean. He'd showered somewhere else, but his knuckles were bruised and split. He moved like something fundamental in him had been rearranged. He's not dead, he said without preamble, like he knew what I was thinking. I let him live. I thought about killing him, and then I realized that dead, he's not suffering anymore. Alive, crippled and disgraced, knowing that everyone knows he betrayed me, that's a better punishment. I didn't respond. You watched the video. It wasn't a question. Yes, and now you see it. You see what I actually am underneath all the protection and the love and the pretty words. He sat on the edge of the bed, and he looked absolutely destroyed. You see what I'm capable of. I see someone who's grieving, I said carefully. Someone who's lost someone who was important to him. Carmine was never important to me. He was useful. That's a lie. I moved toward him. You're lying to yourself because you want me to leave. You want me to see that basement and realize that I've made a terrible mistake. Haven't you? No. I took his broken hands in mine. I made the choice to love someone who's dangerous and broken and capable of terrible things. That was always the choice. You've just stopped hiding what that choice actually means. He looked at me for a long moment, and then something in his expression shifted. It was like watching a door open onto rooms I'd never seen before, rooms filled with loss and guilt, and a kind of desperation that had nothing to do with me. I'm in love with you, he said suddenly. I'm actually in love with you. And it's the most dangerous thing I've ever allowed myself to feel. And I hate it. I hate it because it makes me weak, and weakness in my world is fatal. And I hate it because you've made me capable of doing things I never thought I'd be capable of doing. What did you do? I asked. Before I went to Carmine, I sent people to find the boy's family, his mother. I made sure they understand that his death was on me, and then I made sure that she and everyone she loves never has to work another day in their lives. Because that's what you do to me, Asha. That's what love does to me. It makes me capable of destruction, and then it makes me need redemption, and then I destroy again trying to find it. I held his hands, and I understood that this was the breaking point. This was the moment where I could still walk away and pretend that none of this had happened, that I hadn't seen the video, that I hadn't fallen in love with someone who was fundamentally incapable of being good. Instead, I lay down with him on that bed, and I let him hold me like I was the only thing keeping him from drowning. 3 weeks later, the attempt on my life came during daylight. I was getting coffee at a cafe 3 blocks from the penthouse, something Massimo had reluctantly allowed now that he'd upgraded my security detail. 2 guards dressed in nondescript business suits sat at tables nearby, blending into the generic affluence of the neighborhood. The car that mounted the sidewalk came from nowhere. I was alive because one of the guards, a man named Thomas, who probably had his own list of violence, pulled me backward hard enough to dislocate my shoulder. The car missed me by inches, took out a storefront window instead, and crashed into a parked motorcycle. By the time my vision cleared, there were 5 armed men taking positions around the cafe, and Thomas was already on his phone calling for extraction. "Call Massimo," I gasped, pain radiating through my shoulder and down my arm. "Tell him." "I know what to tell him," Thomas said grimly. We were back at the penthouse within 20 minutes, but Massimo was already there. He must have broken every speed limit in the city to beat us, because he was waiting in the lobby when we stepped out of the armored car. The moment he saw me specifically, the moment he saw the way I was holding my arm and the way Thomas was practically carrying me, his entire face shifted into something reptilian and cold. "Shoulders dislocated," Thomas reported. "The car came from a side street. Professional job. They knew where she'd be." "Someone talked," Massimo said. His voice was the voice of someone who was already calculating deaths. "There's no one left to talk," Thomas replied. "We've been radio silent except for internal channels. Then they have someone inside the penthouse. Someone inside my security. Someone I trust." He looked at me. "This is my fault. I brought you into my world, and then I made the mistake of thinking I could control every variable. We need to get her to a doctor," Thomas said. Massimo moved toward me, and I flinched not because I was afraid of him, but because my shoulder was a supernova of pain. He picked me up carefully, supporting my injured side, and carried me to the private elevator. "I'm taking her to my doctor," he said. "No one goes in or out of this penthouse except people I personally vet. And Thomas? I want to know who's been feeding information to Dimitri. I want their name in the next hour, or everyone who works security gets eliminated until we find them." The doctor came to the penthouse. Massimo's personal physician, a woman with steel-gray hair, and the kind of bedside manner that came from treating criminal overlords. She examined my shoulder with impersonal efficiency, and then popped it back into place with a movement that made me scream. "Dislocated but not broken," she announced. "Ice, ibuprofen, and immobility for at least a week. Could have been much worse. The guard probably saved her life." When she left, Massimo didn't leave the bedroom. He sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my shoulder like it had personally betrayed him. His hands were shaking again. "That was supposed to kill you?" he said softly. "If Thomas hadn't been there, that car was supposed to crush you against that storefront, and I would have spent the rest of my life knowing that my world destroyed you." "It didn't," I said. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're hurt, and it's because I wanted you, and I decided that my desire was worth the cost to you." He stood up and walked to the window. "I'm going to burn everything to find who did this. Every contact, every safe house, every business venture. I'm going to torch it all until I find the person who thought they could take you from me." "Massimo, no. This stops now. This ends now." He turned to face me, and his eyes were absolutely feral. "You're going to make a choice, and you're going to make it now, while you can still think clearly. You're going to tell me if you want to leave. If you tell me yes, I will personally ensure that you disappear so completely that no one in my world will ever think to look for you. I'll give you a new identity, new money, new everything, and I'll delete you from my life so thoroughly that I'll be able to function again." "What's the other choice?" I asked. "The other choice is that you accept that your life is tied to mine now in ways we can't untangle. That people will always be trying to kill you because of me. That you'll have to live in this penthouse or places like it, surrounded by guards, never able to have a normal existence again. I don't want a normal existence, Asha. I don't." I pushed myself up despite the pain. "I haven't wanted it for months. The moment you kissed me, the moment I let you into my life, I made my choice. I choose you, and I choose everything that comes with you." He crossed the room and knelt in front of me, and he buried his face in my uninjured side. I felt his shoulders shake. Whether from crying or something else, I couldn't tell. "I can't protect you," he whispered. "I've tried. I've built walls and surrounded you with guards and done everything in my power to keep you safe, and it wasn't enough. Someone still found a way to hurt you, and I'm terrified that next time, I won't be fast enough. Then we stop trying to protect me, I said, running my uninjured hand through his hair. We stop pretending that there's a version of this where I'm safe. We accept that loving you is accepting danger, and we move forward anyway. He pulled back and looked at me, and his expression was something I'd never seen before, complete vulnerability, complete surrender. I love you, he said. And I hate that I love you because it makes me weak. But I do. Completely. Irrevocably. I know. I leaned forward and kissed him carefully, aware of my injured shoulder. And I love you too. Even though you're terrifying and violent and you've basically imprisoned me in luxury. I love you. He held me like I was something precious and fragile. And for the first time since meeting him, I felt safe. It was an illusion, probably. But I chose to believe in it anyway. The trap was set 5 days later. I didn't know about it. Massimo had decided that what I didn't know couldn't endanger me, but I found out when I overheard him on a phone call with Victor Kushnir. They were setting up a situation where Dmitri would be forced out into the open, where he'd think he'd finally gotten to me, only to walk directly into an ambush. And her? Victor asked through the speaker. Will she be? She won't be aware, Massimo said. I'm moving her before the operation begins. When this is done, Dmitri will be dead, and she'll be safe. I didn't confront him about it. Instead, I waited until that evening, when he was showering, and I called the one person he'd told me never to contact, his mother. She arrived at the penthouse an hour later, and the moment I saw her, I understood where he got his power from. Massimo's mother was tiny, barely 5 feet tall, but she moved like someone who'd built an empire. She was in her mid-60s, with the kind of face that suggested she'd seen terrible things and had survived them all. Asha, she said by way of greeting. My son says you're the reason he's going to get himself killed. I need your help, I said. She listened while I explained what Massimo was planning, how he was going to use himself as bait to destroy Dmitri, how he'd become careless in his obsession with protecting me, how the only way to stop him from dying was to remind him that he had something worth staying alive for besides me. You're asking me to choose a side, she said finally. Between my son and the woman who's pulled him into darkness, I'm asking you to save him from himself. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she nodded. I remember when Juliana died. I watched my son make himself into something inhuman because the alternative was feeling the loss. I didn't think he'd ever come back from that. She reached over and took my hand. But here you are, making the same mistakes he did, thinking you can protect him by sacrificing yourself. I'm not. Yes, you are. You think that by being strong, by accepting the darkness, you're somehow making it easier for him. But you're not. You're just making him believe that the sacrifice is worth it. The operation was supposed to happen at midnight. Massimo had sedated me an hour before slipped something into my food that made my eyelids heavy and my thoughts sluggish. I realized what he'd done too late, but his mother was there. She was there when I woke up enough to understand what was happening. She was sitting in the chair next to the bed, watching me with eyes that were exactly like her son's. Fight the sedation, she commanded. I don't have much time before he realizes I'm here. You need to be coherent. I forced myself to focus, to push through the chemical fog. Where is he? At the docks, setting up the ambush. And Dimitri's taking the bait. But my son, she leaned forward. My son has convinced himself that if he dies tonight, at least you'll live, that the price is worth it. We have to stop him. We can't stop him. But you can. She pressed a key card into my palm. This gets you into the docks through the back entrance. There's a car waiting in the garage. The driver will take you to him. Why are you helping me? Because I've lost one son to this world, she said quietly. And I won't lose another. So you're going to go to that dock, and you're going to make him understand that dying isn't protection, that the only real power he has is choosing to live. I got to the docks, just as gunfire started erupting on the north side. Massimo had set it up perfectly. Dimitri's people were pinned down, couldn't advance or retreat. And Massimo was in the center of it all, moving through the crossfire like he was bulletproof. He was shot twice before I reached him, once in the shoulder, once in the thigh. Blood was soaking through his shirt, and he was moving slower. But he kept fighting, kept advancing toward Dmitri, who was trying to escape via boat. Massimo! I screamed his name from across the warehouse. He turned, and the moment his eyes found me, I saw comprehension flash across his face. Comprehension and betrayal, and something that looked like rage. Dmitri used that moment of distraction to scramble toward the boat. Massimo could have let him go. Instead, he moved to follow, and that's when his shot leg gave out. I was there before he hit the ground. I caught him, took his weight, and held him while bullets tore through the air around us. "You were supposed to be safe," he gasped. "I was supposed to keep you alive," I countered. "And you were supposed to let me." His people stopped shooting when they realized I had him. They secured the area, killed Dmitri as he was trying to climb into the boat. It was efficient and final, a message sent to anyone who might have been wondering if Massimo was still the predator they needed to fear. The private clinic stitched him up while I sat next to the medical table, holding his hand. The doctor removed 2 bullets and told him he was lucky nothing vital hit, just soft tissue damage and significant blood loss. "You're stupid," I told him when we were alone. "I know. You were going to sacrifice yourself. I know. You were going to leave me alone in this world without you." I was. He turned his head to look at me, and his eyes were wet. "I was going to burn everything and everyone I cared about to make sure you were safe." "That's not love," I said fiercely. "That's just destruction dressed up as protection." "I know." He reached over with his uninjured arm and pulled me toward him. "I know. And I did it anyway because I'm not capable of making good choices when it comes to you." "Then we're making a new choice," I said. "Starting now. We're choosing to live, both of us, together. No more sacrifices, no more death wishes. We survive this, and we build something that doesn't require blood." He kissed me then, in that clinical room that smelled like antiseptic and iron, and I tasted his blood and his surrender and something that finally felt like acceptance. "Okay," he whispered against my mouth. "We live, both of us." 6 months later, I stood in the study of a house that belonged to Massimo, in a country that didn't have an extradition treaty with any place he'd ever conducted business. The study smelled like him, leather and expensive scotch, and something underlying that I could only identify as power. He walked in holding 2 cups of coffee, moving with the careful grace of someone still healing from bullet wounds. The leg bothered him sometimes when the weather was cold, and the shoulder was permanently stiffer than it used to be. But he was alive. That was the only metric that mattered. "You're thinking too hard," he said, handing me one of the cups. "I'm thinking about how we got here," I replied. "About the moment in the casino, when you looked at me like you could see inside my soul." I could. He settled into the chair across from me, and his eyes followed me the way they always did, like I was the most important thing in his visual field. "The moment you flinched when I touched the table, I knew you'd been hurt, and I knew that I was going to spend whatever time I had left in this world making sure no one ever hurt you again. You almost died making good on that promise. I know, and I'd do it again." He leaned forward. "But I'd also understand that the only way to protect you is to make sure you don't have to live in fear of my choices. So I made some changes." The changes had been significant. He dissolved his weapons distribution network and transferred it to a partner in Eastern Europe. The information trading had been limited to legitimate intelligence agencies. The money laundering had been minimized to cover only operations he was comfortable running indefinitely. It wasn't redemption. It was just evolution. A careful calibration of his world to create space for something other than violence and control. "I want to ask you something," I said. "Anything. Are you happy?" He considered the question seriously, like he always did when the conversation turned philosophical. "I'm not sure I'm capable of happiness in the traditional sense, but I'm peaceful. I have you, and I'm building something that doesn't require me to burn people's lives to the ground, and that feels like happiness, or at least a reasonable approximation of it. I'm happy," I said. "It's terrifying, because I'm waiting for it to break, but I'm happy." "It won't break," he said, "because I won't let it." There was a knock on the door, soft, deferential. His assistant entered with a phone on a silver platter, like we were still living in the 1950 seconds instead of whatever modern age allowed us to exist. "A call from your attorney," the assistant said. "Regarding the matter of guardianship." Massimo took the phone, and I watched his expression shift into something tender. "Yes?" he said. Then, "And she's adjusting?" A long pause. "Good. Tell her I'll call her tomorrow. Let her know I said hello." When he hung up, he had that look, the one that appeared every time he spoke to Carmine's widow. After Massimo had decided not to kill Carmine, after deciding instead to let him live as a crippled reminder of his betrayal, something unexpected had happened. Carmine's ex-wife had reached out. She'd needed help protecting her daughter, a 12-year-old girl, who was being pursued by people who wanted to use her as leverage against Carmine. Massimo had taken the girl in, set her up with guardians, with education, with every opportunity a child could need to build a life away from her father's shadow. He called her every single day. She still doesn't remember you, I said. I know. When she was dropped off, she was only 10. Frightened, I was the man who took her away from everything she knew. He smiled slightly. By the time she's older, it won't matter. She'll have her own life, and she won't need to remember that I was the reason she was safe. That's not how it works, I said gently. She'll know. Eventually, she'll understand. Maybe. He stood up and pulled me out of the chair, wrapping his arms around me from behind as we looked out the window at the gardens outside. But my hope is that by then, I'll have become someone who protected her for good reasons instead of selfish ones. Your reasons were never selfish, I said. You were trying to protect someone you loved. I was trying to control something I loved, and there's a difference. We stood like that for a long time, watching the light change in the garden, watching the staff move about their work in the distance. This life, this strange, quiet existence where a criminal overlord had learned to be less of a monster, felt somehow more genuine than anything that had come before. I have something for you, Massimo said eventually. He released me and walked to the desk, where he produced a small velvet box. I knew what was inside before he opened it. A ring, nothing simple or modest. Diamonds large enough to be irresponsible, set in white gold that caught the light like captured starlight. Are you asking me to marry you? I asked. I'm telling you that I'm asking you to marry me. He slipped the ring onto my finger with the kind of precision he applied to everything. There's no negotiation, no choice, just acceptance of the fact that you're going to be mine in every way that matters, legally and spiritually, and in every other way I can think of. That's very possessive. I know, and controlling. Absolutely. I kissed him, tasting that expensive scotch, and something underneath that was just fundamentally Massimo, dark, and complex and dangerous even in softness. Yes, I said against his mouth. I'll marry you. Obviously you will. He pulled back just enough to look at me. Because you're in love with me, and love makes people do irrational things. Is that what we're calling it? Irrational? What would you call it? I'd call it choosing to love someone who's fundamentally broken, and hoping that the choice is enough to put the pieces back together. I traced the line of his jaw. I'd call it knowing that I'm tying myself to someone who's capable of terrible things and deciding it doesn't matter because the alternative is a life without him. I'd call it the scariest thing I've ever done. Do you regret it? Not for a second. He kissed me again. And the kiss tasted like a promise, not a promise of a perfect life or a safe existence, but a promise of staying. A promise of choosing each other every single day, in spite of the darkness and because of it. Later, when we were in bed, tangled together in the darkness, he traced patterns on my skin with his fingers. When you walked into that casino, he said softly, I was already dead. I just didn't know it yet. And then you dealt me a hand of cards. And you looked at me like you could see through all the darkness to something human underneath. And I came back to life. You were always human, I said. No, I wasn't. I was a machine built to survive and dominate. You made me choose to be something else. Are you happy with that choice? Every single day, he said, terrified, but happy. I fell asleep with his heartbeat against my ear, understanding that this quiet darkness, this strange peace with someone equally broken was what I'd been running toward the entire time. Not love as it existed in fairy tales. Not some redemption arc where the broken man became good because the right woman arrived. Just two people who were fundamentally incapable of normal, finding a way to exist together that didn't require either of them to change the essential architecture of who they were, and calling it enough, because it was.